Welcome, one and all. You have adjusted the tinfoil on your rabbit ears on that old TV set correctly and are tuned in to your favorite podcast. Welcome, one and all, to The Garage. Thank you for tuning in, and please know that we are so very grateful for all of our listeners and couldn't be more honored that you would take the time to tune us in. We are humbly, as always, at your service. Can you hear the background buzz a little bit? That's right, The Garage is back on the road, and our travels have led us to Possible here in Miami. For those that don't know, Possible is an outstanding industry event brimming with content dedicated to future-thinking marketers combined with innovation and emerging tech. Possible is an event the entire marketing and media community to network with industry peers, share ideas, present visions, and discuss mutual challenges. As you know, I'm your host, Dan Masamino. Consider me the Johnny Carson of our fun adventure in the virtual studio today. Thank you for tuning in, and let's drop some knowledge in an entertaining way to try to make the retail media industry a better place for us all. If you are joining us for the first time, welcome in. Grab your tool belt and slide up to the workbench, and let me fill you in on what it is we do here. The Garage is a place where we get together and talk about many things you're going to find out, but where we really hit that sweet spot is when we get some friends and dive into the why, the how, and who cares about retail media innovation. Speaking of old TV, I am very proud to bring you a man who not only knew who shot JR, he has the final script detailing just what happened to Alf in the final episode, and the 80s kid in me is dying to know. The VP of Product Innovation at Albertsons Media Collective, Evan Hovorka. How are you, sir? And do you remember Alf?
Do you remember Alf? Dan, welcome. Thank you. Another great intro as always. So if you're the Johnny Carson, that makes me the Ed McMahon.
Hey, sir. Hi-yo.
And I think that makes our next guest, I think, the Beatles. I think if we had to rank people, not that we're here to rank, welcome, Shawn, for joining us.
Yeah, no, we're going to introduce Shawn here right now, but you didn't answer my question. Do you remember Alf?
Oh, Alf was great. I watched it.
Not Elf. Alf. Alien life form.
I watched Alf. I did not get the final season script, the wrap-up, pre-internet. So you're just sitting alone trying to ask questions to yourself, to the void. And no, I didn't get the backstory, but I am an avid Reddit user, and the controversy is live.
It's real.
Real.
Yeah, so if you don't know, Alf at the very last episode was surrounded by the FBI, a light in the sky shone, they cut for the end of the season, and then they canceled the show. Heartbreaking to the 80s kid in me, but all that is a different podcast. I want to give our listeners a real treat today. We're going to try to make the complicated simple here, and I know you like the sound of that. Shawn Makhijani is the Senior Vice President of Business Development and Strategy, as well as NBC SpotOn, an advanced video advertising business design for local CTV and OTT advertisers for NBCUniversal's Advertising and Partnerships Division. In this role, he is responsible for business development and strategy across NBCUniversal, just a small startup, right? With a focus on the broadcast business, including NBCUniversal Local and NBC Affiliate Relations. He works with TV, digital, and sales leaders to create strategies and identify opportunities for growth through strategic alliances, partnerships, mergers, and acquisitions, and organic business creation. Makhijani joined NBCUniversal in 2007, initially charged with growing the digital business of the NBC-owned television stations group. His role expanded and was charged with overseeing business development and strategy across all local businesses. Want some more credibility there? Sent your way, we can do that. He started his first broadcast television venture at the age of 15 when he co-founded the popular US-based television network, Namaste America, where he produced and hosted several shows. Please welcome to the Garage, Shawn Makhijani. Welcome. How are you?
Good. How are you?
We are doing extremely well. Thank you for being here in this bustling little burb at the Fontainebleau here in Miami. Tell us a little bit about NBCUniversal and how your current role there works, if you would.
First of all, Dan, Evan, thank you for having me. And I think that was the most thorough introduction I've ever gotten.
You're darn right. We are nothing if not thorough.
I'm wondering how you even got that information, but I'll go with it.
I have my sources.
Yeah. So, you mentioned that it's a little startup, NBCUniversal. SpotOn, the business that I helped found, is a startup within NBCUniversal. And it was actually been a privilege and a journey to be able to found a little engine that could and grow it with a great team at NBC and really become a leader in the local CTV space. I think we're at such a pivotal time in CTV and retail media where so much is changing with data and how we think about reaching consumers, that being able to innovate at companies that are, is a market leader, but also a trusted name in the industry is really important. And I think it's been great to do that. And I also get to work on some fun things like the next generation of broadcast television. I know everyone's thinking it's all about CTV, but there's a lot of great things to come on broadcast, and I've enjoyed working on that as well.
Well, NBC, I jokingly say NBCUniversal is a startup. It's quite the conglomerate, but we all know NBCU is kind of a big deal and home to so many beloved shows, major national, international, big viewing events, but there's a major milestone coming up in the organization. Can you tell us about that a little bit?
Yeah, so 2026 is probably our biggest year ever. It's our 100th anniversary.
Let's go.
From radio to television, but it's also a year of phenomenal live events and sports. So we're going to kick off 2026 with the Winter Games in Milan Cortina. Then we have immediately, as the games are going on, it'll be the Super Bowl on NBC.
Wow, now you're speaking. Let's go.
And then the NBA All-Star Weekend. And, the NBA has come back to NBC. So that's all like in February in the winter. And then when summer comes along, we have the World Cup, the Soccer World Cup, FIFA World Cup, which will be in America.
Yeah.
And it's going to be on Telemundo, which always brings a lot of extra spice to everything. So 2026, we're going to have over 40% of all major viewing of live sporting events will be on NBC.
Wow.
So it's going to be a big year for us.
That's incredible. And, the connection to Albertsons and why we're so excited to have you on today's podcast, that localization, that relevancy of that sports team from your city and the ability to then connect with the viewers that watch those shows is so critical to the CPGs and to the marketers that play through retail media. We, as a retail media industry, are leaning into localization. Nobody's perfected it yet. But one of the biggest draws or the benefits of CTV, especially with partnerships like ours, is to get our ads into the places our shoppers are watching local television. And there's no better place to do that than sports. We are so excited for that part of it, which hasn't even been part of our current journey, which we can get into. But that's like our future state, localization on relevant content, premium content to the shoppers that are buying CPG products.
Yeah. And, having scale is really important. And what these big events do, we're a very fragmented media ecosystem now. It's so much rarer to have events that reach all across America and bring a diverse group of people so that you can then target deeper. So that's why I think you're seeing these events really resonate more and more in the advertising community than they ever have.
So television and NBCU, you guys are the crux of premium content. We're talking about those sporting events there where everybody wants to be. What types of content do you see performing best? Is it just the sports? And have that most longevity? What is it? What performs really well?
So first of all, I'm not a programmer. And if I knew, I would have a different job. But here's what I think is interesting when you tie it back into advertising is what we're seeing is content that engages and connects with the viewer is really what works and then has that longevity, right? So sports, people are very engaged in it. There's different types of programming like The Office. People are very engaged in it. Bravo shows. The Bravo fan base is engaged in that content. They connect with the characters. They're invested in it. That content is what really you're seeing is making or breaking the industry. And then you have, I don't like using the word niche because it somehow implies that it's like a small group. So, it's more specialized content that's out there that is a great thing that we have that opportunity to watch it, right? Everything that we consume today is not meant for everyone. So we as consumers, as viewers, are having our cake and eating it too. We're getting to watch these mass appeal shows that we resonate, we connect with, but then we're also getting engaging content that speaks to attributes within us that maybe isn't shared with everyone in America.
So nicely. But do you want to work for a grocery retailer? Because if you could translate that to what we're doing, and Evan and I were having this conversation this morning, let the audience know a little bit about how we were relating that.
Well, there's a lot of similarities as we're preparing for this episode, but the analogy of content could be carried over to brands. Like brands have some tried and true across America recognized brands. We can pick on Kraft or Pepsi, and they crush, right? Day in, day out, these are top sellers. They also dabbled in within innovation. We know about the Poppy soda brand, the prebiotic soda brand that Pepsi just acquired. You could call that niche, but it's massive now, and it wouldn't have gotten there without having some safe place to grow and curate And the same could be said about content. Like you've done a great job bringing us the hits and then complementing those with up-and-comers who then become hits, or they stay in that niche mode. The ultimate choice is the consumer. Are they going to love Albertsons because we have the big brands that they know and trust and grew up with and have access to some new, small niche, new flavors, new gluten-free options? Yes, they love all of that. And we got to bring it together into a nice platform where they can experience both without having to make multiple trips and do it at a price point that works. So the analogy between Albertsons and Peacock, I mean, there's too many to get into, but those are some really healthy ones.
And what's also interesting is because we have so much data now on who's viewing on CTV, like we know younger people are, of course, re-engaging with The Office or learning about it for the first time and they love it. But the Olympics, Gen Z watched the Olympics in record numbers that, blew our estimates out of the water. But then there's also like classic shows outside from like the ones you always hear about, like Little House on the Prairie, Murder, She Wrote, Columbo, that do really, really well in streaming platforms. And because, your audience is watching it, so you get this mass scale from a Little House on the Prairie because so many people watch it. But if you need an SUV intender or somebody who likes to bake, the chances of finding them in that show are high. And then when you said premium content, all of these classic shows, just because they're not new, they're still ultra premium. Like think about what messaging a show like Little House says. Does it fit every brand? No. But for a lot of brands, who wouldn't want to be associated with family and values and, being on the frontier? It fits with a lot of grocery brands, I would think.
It really does. And, you think of the analogy back to grocery. There's a lot of our products. We've been around for 85 years, not quite the 100 mark like NBCU, but we're close. There's a lot of products that we sold back then that we still sell today.
Absolutely.
Because they're tried and true. Baking, making grandma's Easter cookie recipe. That's not what you would call new and niche and exciting, but wow, does it bring back a feeling of nostalgia and connecting to family. And I think that's a beautiful part of the two things we bring to our communities that choose to spend their time with us. And then, of course, you can sprinkle in some of the new and the exciting, right? That brand new flavor of XYZ, the new collabs, like those are also exciting and niche, and they should complement each other. The other thing we talk about a lot is digital. Like, of course, we love our app and our site growth. It's been extraordinary, but the tremendous amount of sales still happen for grocery in the US in the store, in the physical brick and mortar. You wouldn't call that like brand new or exciting or cutting edge, but it is the bulk of grocery sales, and we have to acknowledge that and appreciate it and support it. You could make that analogy to Little House on the Prairie. How old is that show now? Decades and decades old, and has massive adoption now in the new generation.
78 to 83.
So incredible to think of families still wanting to watch that.
Yeah.
Wow.
I had the entire set of the Laura Ingalls Wilder's book that is based on.
Same.
And read them repeatedly. So, and I'm in Boise. So speaking of the Old West, right? I absolutely feel the nostalgia there. I think there's an element to it we're tiptoeing around and touching on, but that the comfort food of TV is Little House on the Prairie. In grocery, there is an entire brick and mortar store filled with comfort foods. And so to be able to relate the two, bring those inspirational moments together, seeing that, and then serving up a unit that inspires them to go purchase at the store. I think really that nexus that we're starting to create is really the next step and important. But I wanted to touch on a little bit. We know that content is valuable. Evan and I have our opinions, but what do you think retail media brings to the table from your side?
So we've always interacted with grocery stores and retail brands. It was just never this closed loop attribution and the one-to-one targeting. That's what was missing from TV. There was never a dispute that TV is a great place to get your message out. It's just retail media, as targeting came up on digital, traditional digital, could see the one-to-one linkage, and that was missing on television. Now with CTV, we basically have gone from lacking a lot of the advanced targeting to being equal, or if not better in many ways than what you see in other digital environments. So now it's like this new ecosystem universe has been opened up. And that's where we've been partnering with Albertsons to then say, how do we bring all that great data into the CTV environment? There's the easy ones of, we know these people buy baking goods, targeted them one way. But it's even then taking it beyond all of that. So that first stage, we're all in right now, trying to make it work. How do we share data? How do we do the targeting? What are the rules around it? But we're also expanding into more and more ways. Like retail media in CTV has become, how do you take info you know about the consumers and extrapolate from that? So anyone who buys is a big shopper. They buy, and let's leave the total dollar value off, but there's a certain amount of dollar or items that they buy that you could then say, hey, that person maybe is an SUV intender because they can't fit all of that groceries in a compact car.
Right.
Or they own a business, right? Because they buy a lot of supplies, or they have pets, right? So you're trying to use this data to increase your graph of user base, because we don't have data on everyone out there. And just because someone might not be buying baking goods doesn't mean they don't fit another category, right? You want to extrapolate and you have to work together. And the good thing with Albertsons is they have that closed loop attribution. So when we target in different ways, they can see the ROAS. They can see how they're bringing in new customers. And, bringing in new customers to me is such a gift. Your current customer base is super important and we want to efficiently market. But brands also want to grow. And bringing in those new customers in an environment where you're not always touching and tasting everything before you buy it brings in this need to think about marketing in a different way, where you want to be efficient, intelligent, but you want to push the envelope a little bit.
I love that. And this conversation is so important to be happening now. For longtime listeners of this podcast, we wear a humble hat. We're here to educate and to be educated. So the solutions we talk about, we often push for things that can then be standardized or adopted elsewhere. We're not looking to build unique unicorns with Shawn and NBCU. We want to build pipelines that can grow and support any CPG investment or non-endemic investment. And when we looked for partners that could help us on that journey, because we were nascent and new, right? CTV and RMN is a hot topic here at Possible. There's at least 2 conference sessions on that topic alone. It's not easy. And the reason it's not easy is because you've got 2 very disparate positions. You've got the programmatic only. I'm just going to get in, I'm going to get into the auction, I'm going to find my audience, and I'm going to limit the content to what I think is relevant and then buy it. Or you go the other way, the direct IO, and get some super linear, high premium content and pay the price for that content. In the middle lives relationships and conversations and co-development, co-design. And that's where we found such a strong cohesion with the NBCU side. We're not great at finding out all the CTV insights that we need to buy. You needed help, Shawn, on how to integrate with our audiences, how to connect to our measurement solutions, how to play with all of the banners that Albertsons represents. We have 13 different banners across the US. We got to make sure we're showing Jewel-Osco in Chicago. And then which of the Albertsons Safeways are you going to show in California? Because there could be across the street from each other. All of that technology and content had to be infused into your ecosystem to make this really shine for a local and national solution. And that wouldn't have happened without the deep partnership that we had to establish first. I don't know how many months it took before our first campaign, but it was a lot of conversation, a lot of open, transparent, tough convos to get us to that point. And I think that's the answer. When people ask, what's retail media and CTV doing together? How do these 2 work together? It's not an answer around technology or this DSP or that partner. It's open collaboration. Find someone who's trustworthy, find someone who's going to build with you, fail with you. We failed several times on several ideas until we got enough momentum and scale to grow together. And so commending you and your team for helping us through that path.
It's been a true partnership here. I think it's really both teams coming together. And it is almost like we're like the retail media initiatives in both our companies are like startups that we're all coming together and building the ecosystem together.
Right.
And, I loved your question where you said, Dan, what does retail media bring to the CTV ecosystem? Because you have the closed loop attribution, the ROAS measurement, you can measure the feet that actually came into the stores. It brings that accountability to the media, which TV broadcasters have always wanted. We've always felt we never got credit for all of what we brought to the table. And you now, there are other attribution sources, but you give it in such a real, there's no question of what's going on. And when you see the ecosystem, what you learn, we talked about earlier being engaged with the content. When someone's engaged in the content, you have to respect them in then how you advertise to them, which is why I think more than ever, and you see it in the attribution studies, how ad load, frequency caps are so important. You have to respect that this consumer is so, in this Real Housewives episode, that they'll actually watch your ad, right? And you can measure that in these engaged programs. People see the content, they see what they're being advertising, but you can't anger them by then saying, hey, I'm short of people who like baking goods. So I know you're watching 6 episodes. I'm just going to hit you up in every break. Like Peacock won't even allow it if you wanted it. And it surprises me that some platforms allow it, because who enjoys that as a viewer?
Right.
Especially if you're engaged in the content.
I love that.
Relevant, but not annoying. Sounds like good marriage advice too, right?
Yeah.
If you did the two sides of the coin, you could argue networks, big publishers, streaming services have been a little slower to adopt some of the really programmatic ways of buying media. But on the flip side, what you've done is protected ad load. Like you can't argue that. And compared to open web, I mean, ad load, appropriation of ads, relevancy, alignment is so much better on CTV. And then the ad experience itself, right? It's very singular. It's full screen takeover. Some of it's non-skippable. So in terms of like a CPG or a brand getting value out of that investment, they know the eyeballs are on it. They know it's not a distracted, below the fold type of experience. And ideally now it's targeted to their audience. So it's maybe a slower adoption, but a much more premium product and a better product for everybody involved.
One thing I'd like to touch on, we're talking about all the bright, shiny, everything that goes right. Help us out a little bit in understanding when we did start to partner, even if you forecast a little bit what's coming up, what would help look like? What are the barriers that had to be knocked down or need to be knocked down in order to bring the value of premium CTV content and retail media audiences together? What changes do we need to make along this journey, do you think?
Yeah. And rather than call them barriers, we had to chart the course, right? People need to realize there was no template to just execute on, right? The Albertsons team was using programmatic to connect to our inventory and to layer on the targeting. But what I loved about it is, that was one of our first discussions we had with them is we were viewing that as a pipe, but our relationship was built around everything that we needed to figure out, right? Rather than tripling down and saying, oh, it's connected on programmatic. This is what programmatic can do, which means this is what our relationship will be. We said, we're connecting with that inventory this way. But now what do you need, Albertsons? What do your brands need? And how does it all work in the ecosystem on the outcome? So we had to start there. And from that, all of these natural questions started coming up. Evan brought up, you have all these different supermarkets, right? And the right brand had to come up. Albertsons brought different vendors that was making the dynamic ad creations. We needed to talk about what is reliable, what are some of the things that aren't perfect. How do we prepare the client for that? How do we make it better, right? And we did that systematically going, I don't want to go into any particular vendor. I don't think that's the point, but
there were some tough days there, right? I mean, there were some tough calls where we weren't spending, our audiences were too tight, the platforms weren't performing the way we needed to. We weren't going to hit our budgets or impressions. And then we worked through it, right? After a couple, 3 rough days, by the end of the month, we were well above the KPIs the clients were asking for. But it wouldn't have happened if we were just in a programmatic relationship, because we wouldn't have had those phone calls.
Yeah. And, on the flip side also, for us to give advice to Albertsons, we needed to know what was actually going wrong,
right,
or not the way you wanted it. And by hearing it and having open, frank discussions, we're able then to also flip and say, hey, this is what we're seeing. These are some maybe mitigating solutions, or here's a different way to target or call the segment, like to get the same audience, but you're targeting in a different way.
Yeah, that was very helpful.
NBCU is raising the bar on content and cultural moments while lowering that barrier for media accessibility with many access points like self-service. How are self-service opportunities changing the CTV advertising landscape?
So, one of the big initiatives at NBCUniversal has been to democratize access to CTV content, right? Traditionally, CTV, especially in the premium world, has had minimums and has had, you needed a certain amount of expertise to place the orders, relationships to place the orders. And we want to open it up. And the self-service tools right now, it's an evolving space as well, are targeting, 2 types of key user bases. One, like a more performance user base. And these clients typically have expertise in the area. They want to be hands-on keyboard, which means they want to directly connect into the ecosystem, optimize on the fly, but they have that skill set, right? So that's one type of user base. Then the second type of user base is just smaller businesses, right? Who aren't They don't need all the bells and whistles. They just want a simple way to go in, know that they're getting premium content, the shows they want to be on, more straightforward targeting of segments, not custom segments, not a retail media segment, and place that order with a lower minimum, pay with their credit card, and have everything just flow through. So that's really what that's doing. But it's so important in our industry that we continue to have this level of advertising have broadened base, right? That's what I think social did really well, the last, call it 5 years.
Yeah.
But now you're seeing even for smaller businesses, they need the outlet, they need the reach and the environment that CTV provides.
This is a great analogy too. We won't go too deep into it, but we have to offer very similar options to our customers. You can buy the ingredients and you can buy the implements to bake a cake at home, and you can buy flour, baking powder, the pans, do it yourself. You're an expert. You don't need any help. You just need access to the raw assets. Or you can go up a level. You can buy that pre-mixed box. Now the job is half done. You still got to make it, bake it, and eat it. Or you can go all the way up to pre-made cakes. We've got those in our bakery section. We'll even go the next mile and deliver it directly into your house with our Fresh Pass offering. So we've had to operate in that do whatever the customer wants model, which is exactly how a retailer should be operating. Retail media, and to the extent all media, needs to follow the same model. Some have done it really, really well, but basically you just nailed it. Give the assets to the people in the way they want to consume them or are best able to consume them. Sometimes that's a phone call to your team and signed IO and you do all the work. Fantastic. And that maybe opens the door for some clients. Others on the very end of this opposite spectrum, I'm an expert. I know exactly what I need to do. I'm going to automate the heck out of this thing. Just give me your audiences and content. And we've both talked about that expansion as well. We should have answers for any of those options that a customer is looking for, right? And with clean rooms and proper technology setups, we can do that. That is a possibility today. It's not just Meta setting up a buying platform. Now we're talking about a retail media asset and a major publisher building the similar thing.
Yeah. One of the key things I think with that approach, and we really believe in that we want to let the client transact in any way they want, is we're totally agnostic from that. We don't have a sales team that sells a self-service tool versus programmatic versus direct IO versus PG. We have one team that sells everything. We have experts to help people that are in unique things of these different buying methods, but we're totally indifferent. And I think what that leads for clients is we can be totally honest on the pros and cons of each based on your needs, right? We want to consult and help you get what you need rather than double downing on one approach and, trying to get the proverbial round peg through a square hole just because it needs to be direct IO or it needs to be self-service. And I think that's important for everyone in the industry to also think about. In my mind, in my perspective, you don't want people wed on one way over another. And that's how we approached it with Albertsons. Their initial thing was, we're, call it all about programmatic for now, but we're open to hear about others. Walk us through it all. And that started 2-3 conversations of pros and cons of different.
Oh, I never thought about it, but I think that's why our relationship grew so quickly, is because you had an unbiased, centralized team of experts on all those options. We weren't forced down one path, which would have been much more restrictive. That is a pretty unique org structure.
This whole show is nothing if not unique, right? And I want to be a good steward of your time, and I promised that I would get you out of here on time. So before we go, do you want to say anything about your first production at 15 years old?
I want to thank my late father for pushing me to not take the job at the gelato store,
Yes.
which is what I wanted to do. I grew up in a beach town in California, and that was one of the key jobs to get. He pushed me to think bigger, and it started my love affair with television at an early age, and I'm very grateful for that push.
Fathers are awesome. Well, Shawn Makhijani, the Senior Vice President of Business Development and Strategy, NBCU, NBC SpotOn, thank you so much for being part of the Garage today. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me. This was great. And, I love that we get to work so closely with both of you and your teams.
Thank you very much.
Awesome. So this has been the Garage Podcast here at the Fontainebleau for Possible. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you like what you heard, and we know you did, hit that like button. Subscribe as always. Find it on all our different spots that you can find in the podcastverse. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you again on The Garage.